Hey there! I decided to do a little video about the way I play bass guitar with one hand and, well, half an arm. Maybe it is helpful for people with a similar disability, or maybe you are just curious to get a closer look. There are essentially three primary points that one needs to think about when constructing an arm prosthesis like the one I use. Stabilization at the arm, finding a good position and angle for the pick, and stabilization of the pick. Before I go into the details, let me stress that my prosthesis was not built by myself, but by a professional orthopedic mechanic, or maybe also known to you as a prosthetist or orthotist. I'm familiar with the basic construction, but I am not an expert in this field, and for each step that I'm going to look at, it is recommended that you do further research on your own or consult a professional. This video is just a baseline, or a sketch if you will. Sadly, even in a country with a comparably progressive healthcare system, you shouldn't expect that any of the incidental expenses will be covered by anybody but yourself. Because of that, if you have a disability similar to mine and are just considering the idea of playing bass guitar, it would be best to first get a basic understanding of the instrument, maybe by trying to play a very simple song, plucking the strings without any appendage. And if you do decide that you really want to try this out, starting with a rough prototype might still be advised so that you don't pump a lot of money into something that might turn out to not work that well for you. Finally, before I address the points I announced previously, do take into consideration that my lower arm below my elbow is quite short, which made constructing a fitting appendage difficult because elbow movement had to be taken into account. If you have a longer lower arm or no elbow at all, building a fitting prosthesis might turn out to be a bit easier for you than it was for me. Still, you should always assess how variable the movement is that your arm allows, and plan accordingly. Stabilizing the appendage. The appendage does have to be attached to your arm in some way. I would heavily recommend to create a replica of your arm. If you already have experience with orthotics, this might be familiar to you. You start out by wrapping plaster around the arm and then creating a plaster cast as a negative model. Filling this model with a different hardening substance and then carefully cutting open the plaster, you get a positive mold and thus a good replica of your arm. You may want to reduce the size of that model by a slight bit to get a good fit later on. With this model at your disposal, you are free to choose a material you deem fitting for the base part of the appendage. I don't have a whole lot of experience with different materials, but I could imagine that, for example, a custom-made leather wrapping could work. In my case, the exterior of the prosthetic, which is colored blue, is a certain kind of silicone which is elastic but also very stable. There's something important to stress here. Silicone is a widely used base material that comes in a variety of different kinds, and some of these kinds can be harmful to human skin. Thus, be very careful to only use silicone which is, even in prolonged contact with your skin, absolutely harmless. Choosing silicone as the desired material, you would wrap the very elastic and formable base material around the replica of your arm and then put it into an oven to harden out. Once again, this is probably not something you can do at home. It might have to be done by a professional orthopedic mechanic with the proper equipment. Regardless of the material that you choose, you'll want, in the end, an appendage that fits tightly, but is also comfortable, or at least not uncomfortable. If you check one of my old videos, you will see that the appendage can be tightened by a strap as well, for example. In any case, you need to make sure, of course, that the blood circulation of your arm is never impeded. Positioning the pick. There's no ideal way to position the pick, as it depends on how you hold your bass, whether you play close to the neck or close to the bridge, and whether you play downstrokes only or alternate between upstrokes and downstrokes. Two things need to be considered: the position and angle of the pick relative to the strings, and relative to the possible movement your arm allows. On the one hand, you'll want the pick to be parallel to the strings so that you hit it optimally. If you are going for both up and downstrokes, which is essential for faster songs, you need to make sure that both of these kinds of strokes are possible with the current pick position. However, you also need to account for how exactly movement of your arm, or maybe also your elbow joint, might affect the movement of your pick. This is a little bit of a chicken or egg situation, because to really assess the best position for your pick, you do need some experience playing bass already. Nevertheless, you yourself are definitely the one with the best feel for the correct position and alignment of the pick. Stabilizing the pick. Of course, positioning the pick only works in theory as long as you don't have a way to attach it to the appendage properly. This is the hardest part, because especially for a bass guitar, the counter pressure the strings apply when they are struck is substantial and thus needs to be accounted for and worked against. However, you should still be able to move your arm and the prosthetic without a problem and without sacrificing too much comfort and agility. What you will need to do in any case is to rely on a much more sturdy and hard material near the position where you want to attach the pick to your appendage. In the case of leather, for example, there might be a particularly hard kind of leather that you could use, which a skilled person might be able to sew or weave into the existing material. For the silicone variant, it is useful to note that there also exist robust and non-elastic kinds of silicone, which however can still be securely glued to the base material. In the end, you want to have a portion of your appendage which is very sturdy and resistant to pressure. Now there only remains the issue of attaching the pick itself. Of course, you should keep in mind that picks wear out over time and thus need to be replaced at some point. This might be a good time to add another piece of advice. Don't hesitate to modify any picks that you have with some scissors to make them smaller or round them off as needed. There are two possibilities to attach the pick that I know of. The first possibility is to essentially form something looking similar to a coin slot. This is probably the easier method, better suited for a prototype model. Making sure that the slot is narrow and deep enough, it should be stable enough for all purposes, and can also be replaced rather easily. The downside to this method is that over time the slot may loosen a bit and thus your pick won't fit as tightly as it used to, maybe even slipping out when under too much pressure, which can be quite annoying. The second, more advanced possibility, which is the one I'm using right now, is taking two small metal plates and tightly weaving them into the material, then placing the pick between them and fixing it with a screw. You should, in a basic sense, think of the metal plates as one of these pieces from a rather well-known toy manufacturer. In the case of silicone, for example, you would use the kind of silicone that would later be of a very hard and sturdy kind, and when it's not yet in that state, but in an easily modifiable form, weave it through the holes so that when you let the silicone harden, it is tightly woven together with the metal plates. If done correctly, this construction is remarkably robust. So yeah, those are some of the basics that stem from my experiences, having played the bass guitar for a good 6 to 7 years now. If you'd like to see the pick appendage in action, you are free to look at some of the other videos on my channel. And more importantly, please feel free to ask away any questions you might have in the comments below.